Shocking statement. An 11-minute flight may have kneecapped a chunk of Russia's air power, and our footage shows how. This isn't rumor-mongering. Multiple reports point to destroyed aircraft, burning hangars, and a depot hit at depth. We'll reconstruct the pilot's second-by-second duel, Doppler-notching a radar lock, dumping chaff and flares under TOR M2 fire, then yanking a 9G turn to stay alive after two 100-pound bombs left the rails. Watch to learn how a UAV's last GPS waypoint and Ukrainian inertial nav made a hardened base vulnerable, and why the glow was visible from space. Low, fast, and quiet. A single MiG-29 skims the folds of ground where radar beams bend and lose clarity. The jet rides the cold air that hides under ridge lines, staying beneath the long arms of distant search radars. No chatter, no steady transmissions, only brief bursts that cut off before anyone can triangulate. The goal is simple. Stay a small, messy return that looks like ground noise, not a target worth firing at. Up front, 12 miles ahead, a small UAV flies the legal edge of the threat map. It feeds one thing that matters: the final encrypted GPS waypoint for the bombs. Far behind, 50 miles out, an EW station whispers chaos into the spectrum. Not a wall of noise, but clipped pulses, enough to smear range and angle lines on a scope without standing up like a lighthouse. Inside the MiG, the INS ticks like a metronome. When GPS goes dirty in denied zones, the inertial bones carry the course, so the pilot never has to ask the sky for help. The S-400 umbrella looms over the route. It can scan hundreds of objects at once and slap down high flyers at long range. What it hates is speed stitched to terrain. Ground clutter stacks on its filters, and a jet hugging the earth slips inside the seam between the wide area eyes and the short-range teeth. That seam is narrow. It shifts with hills, weather, and the rotation of antennas. Ghost rides that seam like it's painted on the earth. The route bends along riverbeds that carve clean radar shadows. Tree lines add roughness that turns a steady return into a broken smear. The throttle barely moves, easing changes in speed that would pop against Doppler thresholds. Comms are short coughs, a burst to confirm the waypoint arrived, another to call the pulse window from the EW team. Then radio silence. Emissions hunters listen for habits. Ghost gives them none. Here's the trick in plain terms. Radars look for motion toward or away from them. If the jet turns 90 degrees to the radar beam, the closure rate falls close to zero. That's Doppler-notching. The filter, tuned to ignore static ground, lets the blip fade. It only works when the heading lines up and the speed is steady enough to hold that zero rate for a beat or two. Too fast or off angle, and the return pops back into the track file. The MiG uses each ridge to set that perpendicular slice, holds it long enough to bleed out, then rolls back on course. Timing makes the difference. As the jet crosses the last ridge before the target basin, the UAV pushes the coordinates. The pilot checks the INS, watches the drift error, and locks the attack run to that inertial line. The EW station fires its short pulse sequence, then goes cold so no one can walk the beam back to it. GPS-denied bubbles appear in the mission plan as dark zones. The jet never asks for a fix inside them. History backs the method. Low-level runs through ground clutter humbled early warning nets from the Falklands to Desert Storm. Modern ASA sets are sharper, with better side lobe control and multi-beam tricks. But hills still cast radar shadows, and speed still slashes reaction time. Physics keeps that bargain. The base edge rises ahead. Blast shields, revetments, a hard row of hangars. Short-range air defenses point up, expecting a pop-up. Ghost angles for a pop-under, keeping below their look angles, riding the flat between buildings and berms, so the first clean return arrives too late to matter. That three-layer entry, scout coordinates, spectrum fog, inertial backbone, blunts the S-400's reach just long enough to cross the release box. The nose dips half a degree, the pipper settles, and the rails go light. Those seconds are bought, not owned. When steel separates, every scope in range wakes and starts hunting. Steel leaves the rails and the base wakes like it's wired to the same trigger. 3 seconds. Search beams swing, tracking gates open, and short-range radars punch through the clutter the MiG has been hiding in. The first returns come off the blast shields and hangar facades. The second sweep resolves the jet's tail as it breaks across the runway axis. Every crew drilled for this moment moves in parallel. Generators surge, fire control consoles lock their scopes, and the nearest launcher takes the shot. Both 100-pounders are already falling, released low to keep the exposure short. Ghost doesn't climb. He bends into a shallow egress arc that rides the base perimeter, staying in the shadow of revetments and fuel berms to deny a clean look. Countermeasure sequences aren't a guess. They're timed. The first burst goes now, a short ECM strobe coupled to the aircraft's own nose-on aspect change. The second is held for the turn through the TOR's engagement fan, where the geometry gets ugly and fast. TOR M2 is built for this. Short range, quick to react, command-guided with a proximity fuse. It doesn't care how low you fly if you're inside its cone. The lock tone snaps into the pilot's headset as the tracking radar swings through the jet's vector. Range is short. Reaction time is seconds. The first missile leaves a rail with a guidance link ready to steer its nose into the MiG's future position. The second launcher starts its checklist, and the odds tighten. The duel is math and nerves. ECM comes up to mess with the guidance channel, not a blanket jam, but a shaped pattern meant to raise noise on the TOR's receiver. Chaff blooms in trimmed packets, each cloud cut for the TOR's radar band so it looks like a hard target at a slightly wrong range. Flares stay caged until an infrared cue pops from another threat. You don't want to lure an IR seeker if none is hunting. Throttle rolls, small surges up and down to smear the Doppler signature and shift the tone the radar expects. Altitude ticks in 10 and 20-foot bites, keeping the jet's return tangled in ground clutter. Then, the vertical play. Ghost picks a point and pitches up hard, driving for 15,000 feet in a near-stall climb that trades speed for altitude and breaks the missile's intercept triangle. The idea is simple. Change aspect fast enough that the command loop lags. At the top, before energy bleeds out, the jet rolls and unloads. Now comes the 9G pull, a high-load turn that drags the missile across more sky than its control law wants to handle. Missed distance grows with every degree the seeker can't follow. Here's why it works. TOR's command guidance depends on the ground radar measuring both target and missile, then sending corrections. Sudden aspect changes and notching maneuvers stress that loop. When the MiG drags perpendicular to the radar, closure rate collapses, and the tracker's filters hunt for velocity that isn't there. Time the chaff into that notch, and you concede a false range gate. ECM lifts the noise floor while the radar latches onto a brighter, slower-moving cloud that sits where the jet no longer is. Downrange, one hangar cooks off. A shock, then secondary detonations walk the row. A depot fire takes hold, bright and sustained. Later reports match the scene. Destroyed aircraft, broken support gear, fuel burns that gut concrete and wiring. The damage isn't tidy, it spreads. But the escape isn't clean. Fragments rake the MiG on the turnout. One engine takes a hit and starts to limp. Ghost pulls it back, trims for one engine power, and sinks into a low-return corridor where chaff clouds still drift and confuse. Tracking crews chase phantoms while the real jet hugs the dark lane out. That is the survival chain in motion. Notching, ECM, chaff and flares held with intent, the near-stall climb, and a 9G break under TOR fire. The glow carries through the night, but the next move won't be heat. It will be where the batteries move and what gaps that redeployment opens. A short, low, and dirty strike doesn't crush a whole air defense. It bends it just long enough to punch a hole. The cost lands later. Western satellite imagery showed 5 Tu-95 bombers destroyed at Engels 2, a hit that pushed Moscow to move assets it didn't plan to move. 3's 400 regiments left the front to guard the rear, and that shift echoes far from the runway. Tell me where you stand. Precision outlier or the new shape of deep strikes? Like, subscribe, and share which system we break down next in this duel. Next time, we uncover how glide bomb depots become air power's soft underbelly.